So I recently switched from a sort of utilitarian ethics to an agency-based moral framework, and like the logic seems right to me, but it would be very strange to me if I I who am not a professional philosopher came up with something that I haven't yet seen talked about in like philosophy tube or something. So I feel like I'm doing something wrong. And since Paul is very good at picking apart logic, I was hoping to have his opinion.
Well, do me a favor, right? And use small words so I can understand. What do you mean by agency-based moral framework? Can you flesh that out for me?
Right. Sorry, I'll try to slow down. Um, so so one of the main problems I kept running into when I was, whether it's like deontology, or whether I want to give myself an ironclad set of rules, like I need, this is what you're supposed to do in this situation, or whether I want to go to utilitarianism, which is like, okay, we're supposed to maximize pleasure and minimize harm, right? There's always like these weird edge cases where like everything starts to fall apart, right? Whether you have like, don't tell a lie. Well, now there's, I mean, I won't say it because you'll get demonetized, but the usual thing. Or you have, and then utility monsters, stuff like that. So what I went with instead is one where like basically the underpinning of the whole system is the the reason that we say that we should maximize pleasure and minimize harm is because as agents, that's what we're trying to do, because that's just what animals do, right? So instead of getting, I basically just want to cut off the middleman, and okay, I am an agent and other people are agents. So I should try to accomplish what I want without getting in the way of what other people want in as much as is possible, which seems like
I'm not sure.
just much more straight.
I'm not sure I totally agree with your premise because not getting in the way of what other people want assumes other people want pro-social things, moral things, right? What if other people want to spread pseudoscience? What if other people want to torture animals? What if other people want to turn the United States into Gilead? Staying out of their way then would not be a moral act. Is that fair?
Yeah, but the way I figure it, like I live in a society, so keeping a keeping a healthy society is part of not causing problems for anyone, and it's also part of keeping me safe, right? Because like there,
Okay, well,
I'm
hang
gonna
on.
suffer too if we live in a bad society.
Hang on, kind of forgive me, Paul. Kind of we could say Hitler's Germany was a society. Keeping that
Yeah.
society together would not have been the moral thing, and as much as I'm not sure I hold to Godwin's law, I don't think the invocation of Hitler is a cheat in that way, that you've automatically lost. I think there's utility in talking about societies that maybe even they are strong in a toxic way, but they're fortified. The people inside are connected as a society, even in a negative way, in a harmful way. So, this idea that that's the measuring stick for whether or not something is good for us, good for the species, is a little bit problematic for me. I think if you go back to minimizing harm, that to me seems like a better model than I almost hear a live and let live kind of vibe. Am I reading that wrong, kind of?
Well, I mean, sort of like if, well, I mean, like something like Hitler's Germany. I think that is the euphemism we're going to use to is like it might be a healthy society in the sense that it is, as you said, strong in its ability to do things, but like most people were not really able to express their own personal agency in that society. Like obviously, especially if you were Jewish, right? So I wouldn't think that like I wouldn't call that a healthy society from my viewpoint, because if the goal is
Okay,
to
well,
maximize agency, then
let
the
me open it up
society is
then.
actively harm. Okay, sorry.
For the sake of momentum, allow me to make a course correction here, and a better example might be here in the United States. If the Christian nationalists and everybody's
Uh-huh.
speaking freely, right? No one's worried about a machine gun. People coming into their homes and stealing their children. They're not worried about firing squads and all of that in this country. But we are at sort of a boiling point. If the Christian nationalists want to take over and turn us into a theocracy, to weaponize the halls of government, to establish a state church, to strip the rights away from women and LGBT people, etc. Well, those people are able to speak freely, as you and I are speaking freely against it. But in a society, both of those are not equivalent moral positions, are they?
No, no, because well, I mean, I feel like it's the purpose of why we're speaking, right? Like if I'm speaking to try to preserve agency and they're speaking to try to stamp down on agency, then like even if the medium is the same, right? Like the motivations and the goals are not, so they don't have the same moral value.
So, to minimize harm, though, we would like to see the agents of harm defeated. We would like to see specific ideas that have been spoken about freely defeated. We would like to see that sort of segment of poor values, of antisocial values. We'd like to see that defeated. That would not be an enemy of agency. All right. That would not be an enemy of morality. I would think that would be a victory for a more moral way of living. Is that fair?
Yeah, I mean, though I think that falls into like the 90% of cases where like utilitarianism and deontology and what I'm putting forward would all agree.
So where do
I've
you
spoken
this
enough.
agent
Paulogia, go ahead,
this
brother.
well
Go
this
ahead.
agency idea, I'm curious where you think it is superior. What is it about minimizing harm and maximizing flourishing that is insufficient, that is better handled by your agency model? What corner cases are you imagining where that's the case?
So partly it's because, like, I mean, I feel like, well, case in point, like, let's take trans people, right? Like, you under a harm or, pleasure and harm model, we have to identify what is the harm that is caused by, not being able to transition, and what is the pleasure that is enabled by giving HRT and things. But like, under an agency model, you just sidestep that whole thing. Like, okay, well, they want this, and is it causing any problems? Probably not. So let's just let it
Hmm.
happen.
Hmm.
So I feel
So
like
I'm
it
not sure.
streamlines.
Yeah, I think what if I wanted to identify potentially a problem with that is you seem to want to create a heuristic. You want to create a shortcut. You don't you don't want to work through the benefits and the harms. And I feel like that is actually, even though a lot of times just through our hundreds of thousands of years of our species existing, we do have some heuristics on murder bad, stealing bad. Like we have some shortcuts there. But unfortunately, when things get tough, that is the time when you really do need to work through those specific things you just spoke about, and so that you can justify where a person wants to land on those moral issues, as opposed to, and as Seth was saying, if the answer is I'm going to let everyone do whatever they want as long as they're not hurting somebody, you still then need to articulate, are they hurting someone or not? Like, I don't think you've actually removed any burden or removed any work, because you're just by default going to allow people to just go on their way. Am I wrong about that? Am I short shrifting your notion?
I mean, I do feel like I'm not communicating something, but like I feel like the idea as I've communicated, yes, I think you're correct.
Okay.
Like honestly, one
And
of the
all I was gonna say is, if you don't like the golden rule, if you don't like the whole empathy based notion and the superior versions of golden rule, but essentially the empathy based morality that we're speaking of here, another way, if you just want to do the shortcut, is what if everyone behaved in a certain way? So that's a shortcut I like to give to my kids and to other people when they want to come up with if they're wrestling with something that's kind of tricky, right? What's the real harm? let's just take something innocuous, not innocuous, but like I'm gonna pirate a movie, right? There's lots of, is that right or wrong? We could do whole shows on discussion about that. But one way to think about some of those things is, what if everyone in society took the action or inaction that I was about to do, right? So if I'm just going to live and let live, what if everyone lived and let lived in the same way? Would I want to live in that society or not? And I'm not saying I have an answer for you. I'm just saying that's a useful question a lot of times in when it comes to some of these more, if you can't really parse down to the specific harms and the specific benefits, extrapolating an action across a whole society is an often a way of illuminating whether an action is right or wrong. And I don't even like the binary of right or wrong, because I feel like we always have imperfect information and everything's on a spectrum. But was that helpful at all?
I mean, I guess so. I mean, I'm not really trying to eliminate empathy from the equation. If anything, this was me trying to enable more of it.
Okay.
I will admit, one of the reasons I had for considering this probably doesn't interest the new watchers of the show, which is why I kind of omitted it. So I feel like I didn't think this through. Okay.
Well, Keena,
we're
this
just
is
here to talk.
probably, as I sort of take the temperature of the conversation and browse the chat with one eye, it does seem like this may be a conversation more suited to a niche type of forum, which, really, really can get into the deep waters of the morality argument. But it provides at least a starting point for conversations about ethical behavior, pro-social behaviors, and how we can factor agency into those. And I appreciate the call very much, Keena. But I'm going to go ahead and move on to the next, if I may. Would that be all right?
Yeah. Thanks for the reality check and your time.
Oh, you're very
Thank
kind.
you.
Thanks for calling the show. I did I give this example on the show before? You and I both came out of a sort of everything was reductive. Lying is bad. Lying immoral. Do not lie. And I get that, right? Don't be dishonest I think it is an ethical, to do so would be a way to try and live ethically. But we look at life situationally. And was it Shannon? Maybe you and I were talking with Shannon Q on my show. And we came up with the scenario where a woman who's been beaten by her husband and she's horribly battered and terrified shows up at my door. And I open my door and Natalie and I say, "Get in here." We lock the door, right, for her safety. And her abusive husband shows up and he starts banging on the door and he says, "Is my wife in there?" Well, if you only look at the surface, telling the truth would be the right thing to do because we should never bear false witness. We should never be dishonest. We should never lie. But if I'm going to act to minimize harm, the ethical move is to say she's not here or to do whatever I can to remove the immediate threat from that scenario. And so many of these conversations about ethical behaviors, they simply don't make room for that. They think, well, you're trying to be equivalent, you're trying to stretch it out to make excuses for being dishonest in your life, blah, blah, blah. But I just don't think this stuff fits in a cookie cutter. You've had those conversations about what is and is not moral, right?
All the time. Although I way too often I get stuck into what I feared that call was going to be, was how do we ground it? What's the ontology? What's the, how do we remove the ethical consideration out of it and put it into a God's hands, right? Or a non, so an objective sense, they want to say, or an absolute sense of morality. So I'm even a little bit refreshed when people are at least considering, oh, well, let's take harm and well-being, and how do we best suss those out? I know it's a very imperfect science, and as you just illustrated there, I think that is one of the places where ethics-based morality fails over situational based ethics. But if this had been a solved situation, we'd be in a much better society. As I said, I think the best that we can do is have, I feel like the best we can do is have the best intent with the best information available to us. And sometimes that best action actually means getting more information, because we can't just live in the excuse that we didn't know something. There's
I
lots
think
of
it's an
examples in that.
example of
In Go ahead.
the perfect is the enemy of the good. I
Right,
mean,
right.
we are not going to be able to get this totally right. This is messy.